The twisted metal of the royal carriage gleamed under the pale moonlight on the forest road, steam rising from the wreckage like ghosts. Captain Marcus Thorne's hands shook as he pulled the unconscious princess from the debris, her golden hair matted with blood. For 20 years he had sworn to protect the royal family with his life. For 20 years he had watched Princess Ilara grow into a woman, never knowing the devastating truth. But as he cradled her broken form against his chest, her torn sleeve revealed a crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder, the same mark his infant daughter had borne before she vanished from her crib 2 decades ago, the same mark that haunted his nightmares and destroyed his marriage. The princess he had sworn to protect was the child who had been stolen from him. The queen he had served faithfully was the woman who had ripped his family apart. Every smile, every royal wave, every thank you, Captain, had been built on a lie that would topple the throne. But who would believe a common guard's word against the crown? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus pressed his fingers to Ilara's throat, relief flooding through him as he felt a steady pulse beneath her pale skin. Her breathing was shallow but consistent. Around them, the forest remained eerily silent except for the settling groans of twisted metal and the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats, his fellow guards following the carriage route when they failed to arrive at the summer palace. He should call out, alert them to the accident, should focus on getting medical attention for the injured princess. Instead, he found himself frozen, staring at that damning crescent mark that had just shattered his world. 20 years ago, he'd been a newly appointed guard, barely 25, with a wife who adored him and a 6-month-old daughter who was the light of his existence. Baby Clara had been perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a distinctive birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on her left shoulder. Sarah used to kiss that mark every night, calling it Clara's lucky star. Then came that terrible morning when Sarah's screams woke the entire barracks, the empty crib, the open window, the ransom note that never came, the investigation that led nowhere. Sarah had blamed him, said his position as a royal guard had made them targets. She'd left him within the year, unable to bear the sight of the man who'd failed to protect their child. The hoofbeats grew closer. Marcus carefully adjusted Ilara's torn sleeve to cover the birthmark, his mind reeling. The timing aligned perfectly. Princess Ilara was 19, would be 20 in the spring. Queen Isabella had claimed the princess was born during a private retreat away from the palace, which had always struck the court as unusual for a royal birth. No witnesses except the Queen's most trusted lady-in-waiting, who had died of fever 2 years later. "Captain Thorne!" The voice of Lieutenant Hayes cut through the night air. "We see the wreckage." "Here," Marcus called back, finally finding his voice. "The princess is alive but injured." Within moments, the forest filled with the controlled chaos of the Royal Guard's emergency protocols. Torches blazed to life, transforming the crash site into a pool of flickering orange light. Sergeant Willem knelt beside Marcus, already reaching into his medical kit. "How bad?" Willem asked, his weathered hands expertly checking Ilara's vitals. "Unconscious, possible head trauma. Some cuts and bruises, but nothing appears life-threatening." Marcus heard himself speaking with professional detachment while his thoughts spiraled. "The horses? Dead on impact," Hayes reported grimly. "What happened?" Marcus looked toward the carriage wheels, noting the way they'd locked and skidded. Something spooked them. They bolted, took the turn too fast. He paused, considering the implications, or someone wanted it to look that way. Willem glanced up sharply. "You think this wasn't an accident?" Before Marcus could respond, Ilara stirred in his arms, her eyelids fluttering. When she opened her eyes the same deep brown as Sarah's, he realized with a jolt. She seemed disoriented, afraid. "Captain?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What happened?" "Your carriage crashed, Your Highness. You're safe now." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Safe. She'd never been safe, had she? Stolen from her real family, raised by the very woman who'd orchestrated her kidnapping, surrounded by guards who unknowingly protected her from the father who'd spent 2 decades searching for her. As Willem and the others prepared to transport Ilara back to the palace, Marcus caught himself studying her face in the torchlight. How had he never seen it before? The shape of her nose, the stubborn set of her chin when she disagreed with court protocols, even the way she unconsciously twisted her hair when deep in thought, all mannerisms he recognized from his own family. The princess, his daughter, was returning to the palace, to the queen who'd stolen her, and Marcus would escort her there as duty demanded, carrying the most dangerous secret in the kingdom. The morning sun cast long shadows through the castle's training grounds as Marcus adjusted his grip on the practice sword. 3 days had passed since the accident, 3 days since his world had tilted off its axis. The physicians had declared Princess Ilara fully recovered, but Marcus felt as though he were drowning in questions that had no safe answers. "Your form is sloppy today, Captain." Sergeant Willem's gruff voice cut through his thoughts. "Perhaps you should visit the healers yourself." Marcus parried the next strike with more force than necessary, sending Willem stumbling backward. "My apologies, Sergeant. My mind wandered." Willem lowered his blade, studying Marcus with weathered eyes that missed nothing. "Wandered to where, exactly?" "You've been distracted since the carriage incident. The princess is well, the threat eliminated. What troubles you? If only it were that simple." Marcus sheathed his sword, wiping sweat from his brow. "Nothing that concerns the guard, Willem. Everything that concerns you concerns this guard. We've served together for 15 years, Marcus. I know when something's eating at you from the inside." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the castle's main entrance drew their attention. Queen Isabel's voice rang across the courtyard, sharp with irritation. "I don't care what the merchants claim. The princess will not be making public appearances this week. She needs rest." Marcus watched as Ilara appeared beside her mother, chin lifted in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. Even from this distance he could see the familiar spark in her green eyes, the same shade as his own, the same shade as Lydia's had been. "Mother, I'm perfectly fine. The people deserve to see that their princess wasn't harmed. It would ease their fears. The people will survive their fears. You will remain within the castle walls until I say otherwise." Marcus found himself moving toward them before he'd consciously decided to do so. As captain of the guard, he had every right to be involved in discussions of the princess's safety, but his true motivation ran far deeper than duty. "Your Majesty." He bowed as he approached. "If I may suggest a compromise?" "A brief appearance in the castle's public gardens. The people could see that Princess Ilara is well, while still maintaining proper security." Queen Isabel's cold gaze fixed on him. "Captain Torres, while I appreciate your dedication to your duties, matters concerning my daughter's schedule are not your concern." "My daughter." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He caught Ilara watching him with curious eyes, and for a terrifying moment he wondered if she could somehow see the truth written on his face. "Of course, Your Majesty. I merely thought—" "You merely thought incorrectly." The Queen's tone brooked no argument. "Princess Ilara will remain inside today. See that your guards are informed." As the Queen swept away, Ilara lingered for a moment. She approached Marcus with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the years of his service. "Thank you for trying," she said quietly. "Mother has been particularly protective since the accident." "It's natural for a mother to worry," Marcus replied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Ilara tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You've been different since that day too. More watchful, if that's even possible. Is there something about the attack you haven't told us?" Marcus felt Willem's eyes on him from across the courtyard. "Nothing beyond what's in my report, Princess. Though I confess, the incident has reminded me how precious life is, how easily we can lose those we—" He caught himself before the word love could escape. "Those we're sworn to protect." Something flickered across Ilara's face, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "Marcus, may I ask you something?" His heart hammered against his ribs. Of course. That night, when you pulled me from the carriage, you looked at me strangely, as though you'd seen something that shocked you. What was it? The lie came easier than he'd expected. I thought for a moment that you were seriously injured. The relief when I realized you weren't. It was overwhelming. Alara nodded slowly, but her eyes remained thoughtful. I see. Well, I should return to my chambers before Mother sends a search party. She paused. Marcus, thank you again for everything. As she walked away, Marcus felt Willem approach behind him. That girl has grown up well, the sergeant observed. Remarkable how much she resembles you, actually. Same eyes, same stubborn set to the jaw when she's thinking hard about something. Marcus went rigid. What are you suggesting? Nothing at all, Willem said easily. Just an observation. Though I've always wondered why Queen Isabel kept her pregnancy so secret all those years ago. Barely anyone in the castle even knew she was with child until the princess was born. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus turned to face his old friend, searching for any sign of suspicion or knowledge in his expression. Careful, Willem. Such observations could be construed as treasonous. Willem smiled grimly. Indeed they could. Good thing I'm known for my discretion. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Come, we have training to complete. The castle's stone corridors felt colder than usual as Marcus made his way through the pre-dawn darkness, his boots echoing softly against the worn flagstones. Sleep had eluded him completely since returning from the forest road 3 days prior. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that damning crescent moon, pale against Princess Lyanna's shoulder, identical to the mark that had graced his daughter's tiny form 17 years ago. He paused outside the royal physician's quarters, his hand hovering over the heavy oak door. Dr. Aldrich had attended the birth of his child, had been the one to gently break the news of her death mere hours after she'd drawn her first breath. If anyone could provide answers to the questions burning through Marcus's mind, it would be him. The knock came out more forceful than intended, reverberating through the empty hallway. Moments later, shuffling footsteps approached, and the door creaked open to reveal the elderly physician's weathered face, bleary with sleep. Sir Marcus? Aldrich squinted in the dim torchlight. Is someone injured? The princess? She's fine, Marcus said quickly. I need to speak with you about something that happened long ago. The physician's expression shifted, a flicker of wariness crossing his features. He glanced down the empty corridor before stepping aside. Come in. The chamber smelled of herbs and old parchment, lined with shelves containing countless bottles and medical texts. A fire crackled weakly in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the room's contents. Aldrich moved to stoke the flames, his movements deliberate and slow. What troubles you, my friend? The old man asked without turning around. Marcus studied the physician's profile, searching for any hint of deception. I want to know about my daughter's death. The poker clattered against the stone hearth. Aldrich's shoulders tensed, but he continued tending the fire. That was 17 years ago, Marcus. Why torment yourself with such painful memories? Because I've discovered something that makes me question everything I believed about that night. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Tell me exactly what happened after my daughter was born. You know what happened. Aldrich finally turned, his face grave. The birth was difficult. Your wife lost too much blood. The child was weak, born too early. Neither survived the night. You told me my daughter had a birthmark, a crescent moon on her shoulder. The color drained from Aldrich's face. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the poker. Marcus, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions, and I want direct answers. Marcus's voice carried the authority he'd learned commanding men in battle. How common are such birthmarks? Quite rare, actually. The words came out reluctantly. Perhaps one in several thousand births. And yet both my daughter and Princess Lyanna bear the same mark in the same location. Aldrich sank heavily into a chair beside his desk, suddenly looking far older than his 60-odd years. His fingers drummed nervously against the wooden armrest. "Coincidences do occur, Marcus. The mind can play tricks when grief—" "Don't." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. "Don't insult my intelligence or my grief. I've served this crown faithfully for 20 years. I've earned honesty, at least from those I consider friends." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Aldrich's internal struggle was visible in the lines of his face, the way his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. "Some truths," he said finally, "are too dangerous to speak aloud. More dangerous than living a lie that has poisoned my soul for 17 years. Aldrich rose abruptly and moved to his window, gazing out at the castle grounds where morning mist was beginning to gather. "If I were to tell you that sometimes the greater good requires terrible sacrifices from good men, what would you say?" "I'd say that sounds like something a man tells himself to justify the unjustifiable. And if I told you that some secrets, once revealed, could topple kingdoms and cost thousands of lives?" Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "Then I'd know you weren't speaking in hypotheticals anymore." The physician's reflection in the window glass looked haunted. "Your daughter was born healthy, Marcus. Beautiful and strong, with lungs that announced her arrival to half the castle." The words hit like physical blows. Marcus gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "Then why—" "Because 3 floors above, the Queen's labor was not proceeding as well. Her child was born blue and still, never drawing a single breath. And Queen Isabella's grief, it was a terrible thing to witness. She spoke of ending her own life rather than face King Edmund's disappointment." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. "You switched them." "I was commanded to save the realm," Aldrich whispered. "By any means necessary." The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across Marcus's weathered face as he sat hunched over his small wooden table, the torn piece of fabric spread before him like evidence of a crime. 3 days had passed since the accident, 3 days of watching Princess Ilara from his post while his mind churned with impossible thoughts. The silk fragment seemed to mock him with its delicate beauty, its royal purple threads catching the amber glow. He reached into his leather satchel with trembling fingers and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in rough cloth. Inside lay the only treasures he possessed, a lock of golden hair tied with a simple ribbon, and a child's dress made from the very same purple silk. His dead wife Sarah had sewn it herself during the final months of her pregnancy, dreaming of the daughter they would raise together, the daughter who had been stillborn, or so he had been told. Marcus held the fabric samples side by side, his soldier's eye noting every detail. The weave was identical, the color matched perfectly, even the subtle pattern of silver threads running through the purple was the same. His hands shook as the implications crashed over him like a tide. A sharp knock at his door shattered the silence. Marcus quickly bundled the items away, his training taking over despite his emotional turmoil. "Sir Marcus," a young page's voice carried through the thick oak. "Her Highness requests your presence in the royal gardens." The walk through the castle corridors felt endless. Servants bowed as he passed, their faces showing the same respect they had always shown, unaware that the man striding past them carried a secret that could topple kingdoms. The late afternoon sun painted the stone walls golden as Marcus emerged into the sprawling gardens where Princess Ilara waited beside a fountain carved with dancing nymphs. She had recovered remarkably well from the accident, showing the same resilience that had always impressed him. Her golden hair was arranged in an elaborate braid, and she wore a gown of deep blue that complemented her eyes that Marcus now realized were the exact shade of his own. "You've been avoiding me," she said without preamble, her direct manner so familiar it made his chest ache. "Your Highness, I would never—" "Please." She raised a hand, and he noticed how gracefully she moved, with the same economy of motion he had developed through years of swordplay. "We've known each other too long for such formality when we're alone. I can see something troubles you." Marcus struggled to maintain his composure. How could he look at her now and not see the truth written in every feature? The determined set of her jaw when she was frustrated, the way she unconsciously touched her throat when nervous, habits he had attributed to her noble breeding but now recognized as echoes of his own mannerisms. "The accident was no accident, was it?" Ilara continued, moving closer to study his face. "I've been thinking about it constantly, the wheel coming loose at precisely that moment, on that particular stretch of road where the drop was steepest." Her perceptiveness struck him like a physical blow. Of course, she had reasoned it out. She had inherited his analytical mind along with his eyes and stubborn streak. "I believe you may be right, Your Highness," he admitted, grateful to focus on something other than the devastating truth burning in his chest. "I've been investigating the carriage, examining the wheel assembly." "And what did you find?" Marcus hesitated. The investigation was real. He had spent hours studying the damaged vehicle, but his discoveries about potential sabotage paled in comparison to the personal revelation that consumed his thoughts. "The axle pin was filed nearly through," he said finally. "It was designed to fail under stress. Someone wanted you dead, Your Highness." Ilara's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "Do you have any suspicions about who?" Before Marcus could answer, footsteps on the gravel path announced another arrival. They both turned to see Queen Isabel approaching with her characteristic regal bearing, flanked by 2 guards. The Queen's dark hair was shot through with silver, and her keen eyes missed nothing as they swept over the scene. "Ilara, my dear," the Queen said, her voice warm but edged with something Marcus couldn't quite identify. "I've been looking for you. And Sir Marcus, I trust you're taking good care of my daughter?" The word daughter hit Marcus like a sword thrust. He watched the Queen's face carefully, searching for any hint of guilt or deception. Queen Isabel had always been kind to him, rewarding his loyal service with trust and respect. Could this woman have stolen his child and raised her as her own? "Sir Marcus was just telling me about his investigation into the carriage accident," Ilara said, seemingly unaware of the tension crackling in the air. The Queen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a fleeting shadow crossing her features. "Investigation? How thorough of you, Sir Marcus. I trust you'll keep me informed of any discoveries." The emphasis on the last word sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Did she know that he knew? Or was he simply imagining threats where none existed? The morning sun cast long shadows across the castle courtyard as Marcus made his rounds, but his mind wandered far from his duties. 3 days had passed since the accident, and Princess Ilara had recovered enough to resume her daily walks through the gardens. Each time he glimpsed her golden hair catching the light, his chest tightened with a pain he couldn't name. He'd convinced himself it was impossible. The birthmark was merely coincidence, a cruel trick of fate that had awakened memories better left buried. Yet doubt gnawed at him like a persistent wound, growing more infected with each passing hour. "Captain Blackwood?" A young page appeared at his elbow, slightly out of breath. "Her Majesty requests your immediate presence in the throne room." Marcus's blood chilled. Had someone seen him examining Ilara's shoulder? Had the princess mentioned his strange behavior? He followed the page through corridors that suddenly felt like a march to the gallows. Queen Isabel sat rigid upon her throne, her ice-blue eyes tracking his approach. No warmth softened her angular features. There never had been, not in all his years of service. Behind her, shadows pooled in the alcoves where other members of the court might normally stand, but today they were conspicuously alone. "Your Majesty." Marcus dropped to one knee, keeping his eyes fixed on the marble floor. "Rise." Her voice carried the sharp edge of winter wind. "I understand you've been attentive to my daughter's recovery." The words hung between them like a blade. Marcus straightened, choosing his response carefully. "I take my duties seriously, Your Majesty. The princess's safety is my paramount concern." "Indeed." Queen Isabel descended the throne steps with predatory grace. "Tell me, Captain, what do you know of loyalty?" "I know it above all else, Your Majesty." "Do you?" She circled him slowly, her silk gown whispering against stone. "Loyalty requires sacrifice. It demands we place duty before personal desires, crown before heart. Some men discover they lack such strength when truly tested. Marcus felt sweat gathering beneath his collar despite the cool air. I have never wavered in my service to the crown. No, you haven't. Which is why I find myself curious about your recent behavior. My daughter mentioned you seemed troubled during her rescue. Distracted. She wondered if you'd been injured as well. The princess's concern was a knife twist he hadn't expected. How could he explain that saving her life had shattered everything he thought he knew about his own? The responsibility of her safety weighs heavily, Your Majesty. I blamed myself for allowing the danger to occur. Queen Isabel stopped directly before him, close enough that he could smell her cold perfume. Self-doubt is a luxury you cannot afford, Captain. The princess requires protection from many threats, some more subtle than runaway horses. Her meaning crystallized like frost on glass. Someone had been watching. Someone had noticed his attention to Ilara, though perhaps not the specific reason for it. There are those, the Queen continued, who might seek to exploit any perceived weakness in our defenses, who might mistake professional dedication for something more inappropriate. Marcus met her gaze steadily. My devotion to the princess is purely that of a guard to his charge. I'm certain it is. Just as I'm certain you understand that any man who forgot his place would face consequences extending far beyond his own ruin. Her smile was winter itself. After all, we must consider what becomes of those who spread unfortunate rumors, questions about legitimacy, bloodlines, succession. Such talk has toppled kingdoms. The breath left Marcus's lungs in a rush. The Queen's words weren't random warnings. They were targeted strikes. But did she know what he suspected, or was she merely ensuring his continued discretion about whatever he might discover? I would die before allowing harm to come to the royal family, he said quietly. In any form. I believe you would. Queen Isabel returned to her throne, settling her skirts with deliberate precision. Which brings me to my proposal. I'm sending Princess Ilara to visit her aunt in the northern provinces. The change of air will complete her recovery, and the journey will remove her from unnecessary complications. Marcus's hands clenched involuntarily. For how long, Your Majesty? Until I'm satisfied the complications no longer exist. Her smile sharpened. You, of course, will remain here. I have new duties in mind that will require your complete attention. The dismissal was clear. Marcus bowed deeply, understanding that he'd been outmaneuvered before he'd even realized they were playing a game. As he turned to leave, the Queen's voice followed him. Captain, remember that truth is often less important than stability. Wise men know which to choose. Outside the throne room, Marcus leaned against the stone wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Queen knew something. How much remained unclear, but enough to separate him from Ilara before he could learn more. Tomorrow, the princess would leave for the north, carrying with her the only chance he might ever have of discovering whether his greatest joy or his greatest tragedy lay hidden beneath that small star-shaped mark. The royal physician's chambers smelled of herbs and old parchment, a sanctuary of knowledge tucked away in the castle's east wing. Marcus had waited until the evening shift change, when the corridors would be empty save for a few drowsy guards who knew better than to question his movements. Dr. Aldrich looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his weathered features as Marcus stepped into the lamplight. Captain, is someone injured? The old man's voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had tended countless wounds and witnessed too many secrets. I need to ask you about birthmarks, Marcus said, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Specifically, hereditary ones. Aldrich's quill paused mid-stroke. His pale eyes studied Marcus with newfound intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. That's rather an unusual topic for this hour. Or any hour, coming from you. Marcus moved closer, his hand instinctively resting on his sword hilt. Not in threat, but for comfort. You delivered my daughter 18 years ago. You saw her birthmark, the crescent moon on her shoulder. The physician set down his quill entirely, the small sound echoing in the quiet room. Marcus, what are you asking me? I'm asking if you remember it clearly, every detail. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because I've seen another mark just like it, identical to it. The color drained from Aldrich's face. He rose slowly, moving to a cabinet filled with leather-bound journals. His hands trembled slightly as he withdrew one, its spine worn smooth from handling. I keep records of every birth I attend, every death, every irregularity. Marcus watched as the old man flipped through pages, his movements growing more agitated with each passing moment. Finally, Aldrich stopped, his finger hovering over an entry dated 18 years prior. Your daughter was born at sunset on the feast of St. Lucia, Aldrich said, his voice hollow. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Perfect health, a distinctive crescent birthmark on her left shoulder blade, roughly the size of a silver coin. And Princess Lyanna? Aldrich's silence stretched between them like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his words came out broken, haunted. Born the same night, 3 hours later, at the palace. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The same night. I delivered them both. Aldrich closed the journal with a soft thud. Marcus, you cannot possibly be suggesting that my daughter was stolen and replaced with royalty? Marcus's laugh held no humor. The thought had crossed my mind. The physician sank into his chair as if his bones had suddenly aged a decade. The princess was born prematurely, weak. The queen was... Distraught doesn't begin to cover it. She'd already lost 2 children in infancy. The kingdom needed an heir, and she was convinced this baby wouldn't survive either. But she did survive. Against all expectations, yes. By morning, she'd grown stronger. The queen called it a miracle. Aldrich's hands clasped and unclasped nervously. I never questioned it. Royal babies often rally unexpectedly, but what? The birthmark. I remember thinking it was unusual for a premature child to have such a pronounced marking. They typically develop later. Aldrich met Marcus's gaze directly for the first time since the conversation began. Where did you see this identical mark? Marcus had rehearsed this moment in his mind a dozen times, but the words still felt like poison on his tongue. On Princess Lyanna. The journal slipped from Aldrich's lap, hitting the stone floor with a dull thump. The sound seemed to echo endlessly in the small chamber. Dear God, you're the only one who would know for certain. You delivered both babies. You would have seen... I saw nothing, Aldrich said sharply, then caught himself. His voice softened to a whisper, because I wasn't allowed to see. After the princess's birth, Queen Isabel dismissed all attendants except her most trusted lady-in-waiting, said she wanted privacy for the first feeding. Marcus felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. Lady Meredith. She's been dead for 10 years now. Took whatever secret she had to her grave. Aldrich stood again, pacing to the window that overlooked the courtyard. Marcus, even if what you're suggesting were true, and I'm not saying it is, what would you do with such knowledge? The question Marcus had been avoiding crashed over him like a cold wave. I don't know. The princess you suspect might be your daughter has lived her entire life as royalty. She's beloved by the people, engaged to secure a vital alliance. Her very existence maintains the stability of the realm. Aldrich turned back to face him. And your actual daughter? Is dead. The words tasted like ash. Has been dead for 18 years, while I've spent every day protecting the girl who might have taken her place. The 2 men stood in silence, the weight of possibility hanging between them like a sword. Outside, the castle bells chimed midnight, marking the end of another day built on foundations that might be nothing more than elaborate lies. The morning air carried the scent of jasmine through the palace gardens as Kieran made his final rounds before the dawn shift change. Sleep had eluded him for 3 nights running, ever since he'd seen that damning birthmark. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ina's face morphing into his lost daughter's, heard his wife's dying whispers about their stolen child. Captain! A young guard approached, his armor clanking softly. The Queen requests your immediate presence in the Rose Chamber. Kieran's blood chilled. Had someone seen him lingering outside Elena's chambers? Had the princess herself reported his strange behavior? He straightened his shoulders and nodded, following the familiar path through marble corridors that suddenly felt like a maze designed to trap him. Queen Isabel sat at an ornate writing desk, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate crown of braids. She didn't look up when he entered, continuing to scratch at parchment with a golden quill. The scratch, scratch, scratch echoed in the silence like tiny claws against his nerves. "You saved my daughter's life," she said finally, setting down the quill. Her pale eyes met his, and Kieran fought to keep his expression neutral. Those eyes held secrets. He was certain of it now. "Any guard would have done the same, Your Majesty." "Perhaps, but not every guard would refuse a reward." She stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. "You've served this crown faithfully for 15 years, Kieran, since before Elena was born." The emphasis on those last words felt deliberate, like a blade testing the strength of armor. Kieran's hand instinctively moved toward his sword hilt before he caught himself. "I remember when she was brought to us," the Queen continued, her voice softer now. "Such a tiny thing. The midwife said she nearly didn't survive the birth." Lies. All lies. Kieran's jaw clenched as he watched Isabel's reflection in the window glass. Her face revealed nothing, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed something. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Your Majesty is fortunate to have such a spirited daughter." Spirited, yes. Too spirited, some would say. Isabel turned back to face him. "She's been asking about you constantly since the accident. Wants to thank her brave rescuer properly. I thought perhaps you might join us for dinner tonight." The invitation felt more like a summons, wrapped in silk but weighted with iron. Kieran bowed slightly. "It would be my honor." "Excellent. And Kieran?" Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Some secrets are too dangerous to speak aloud. They have a way of destroying everything we hold dear." The warning hit him like a physical blow. She knew. Somehow, she knew what he'd discovered, and this was her way of telling him to stay silent. His mind raced, trying to understand how much she suspected, how much danger Elena might be in if the truth emerged. After dismissing him, Kieran wandered the castle like a ghost, his duties mechanical and distracted. He found himself in the archive chambers, pulling dusty records of births and deaths from 15 years past. The royal birth announcement for Princess Elena was there, dated precisely when his own daughter had been born. But the paper felt newer than it should, the ink not quite faded enough. Looking for something specific? Kieran spun to find Lord Chancellor Aldrich emerging from the shadows between the towering shelves. The older man's keen eyes missed nothing, and Kieran felt exposed, as if his treasonous thoughts were written across his face. "Just reviewing security protocols from past years, my lord. After the accident, I want to ensure we haven't overlooked any patterns." Admirable dedication. Aldrich stepped closer, his presence somehow making the spacious archive feel cramped. "Though I wonder if perhaps you're looking too deeply into things that are better left undisturbed." Another warning. How many people in this palace knew the truth about Elena's parentage? The thought made Kieran's stomach turn. Had his daughter been living among conspirators her entire life, unaware that her very existence was built on deception? "The safety of the royal family is my primary concern," Kieran replied carefully. "As it should be. But remember, Captain, sometimes protecting someone means shielding them from truths that would only bring them pain." Aldrich's weathered hand settled on Kieran's shoulder with surprising weight. Princess Elena has known nothing but love and privilege her entire life. Would it truly be kind to strip that away? The question haunted Kieran as he left the archives. Would exposing the truth serve Elena, or would it merely satisfy his own desperate need to reclaim his lost child? The kingdom needed stability, and Elena's legitimacy was crucial to preventing civil war. But every fiber of his being screamed against allowing the injustice to continue. As evening approached and he prepared for dinner with the royal family, Kieran realized he was walking into a delicate dance of deception. One wrong step, one unguarded moment, and everything would come crashing down around them all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training yard as Marcus adjusted his grip on his sword, the familiar weight offering little comfort. 3 days had passed since his world shattered, and sleep remained an elusive stranger. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that damning birthmark, the crescent moon that marked Ilara as his blood, his stolen daughter. "Your form is sloppy today, Captain." Sir Henrik's voice cut through his brooding as the older knight approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "Perhaps you should rest." Marcus forced his shoulders to straighten, muscle memory taking over as he executed a series of practice strikes. "I'm fine, Henrik. Just tired. Tired men make mistakes. Mistakes get princesses killed." The words hit harder than intended, and Marcus lowered his blade. Henrik had served the crown for 30 years. His loyalty was beyond question, but his perceptiveness had always been sharp as his sword. "What troubles you, old friend?" Henrik stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've been like a ghost these past days." Marcus opened his mouth to deflect, to offer some mundane excuse, but the weight of his secret pressed against his chest like a physical thing. "Henrik, if you discovered something that could destroy the kingdom, would you act on it?" The older knight's eyes narrowed, studying Marcus with the intensity he usually reserved for potential threats. "That depends on whether the truth served justice or merely vengeance." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Princess Ilara emerged from the castle's side entrance, her mourning riding dress a splash of deep blue against the grey stone. His breath caught as it did every time he saw her now. The resemblance to Lyanna so pronounced he wondered how he'd ever missed it. "Captain Morris, Sir Henrik." She offered them both a smile that was achingly familiar. "I was hoping to find you here." "Your Highness." Marcus bowed, fighting to keep his voice steady. "How may we serve you?" "I wanted to thank you again for your quick thinking during the accident. Dr. Hawthorne says I'm fully recovered." She paused, and something flickered across her features, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "I also wanted to ask you something privately, if I may." Henrik took the hint, bowing respectfully before retreating toward the armory. Marcus found himself alone with his daughter, the words still foreign and painful in his mind. Ilara glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard before stepping closer. "Captain, that night, when you were treating my injuries, I noticed you seemed surprised by something. What did you see?" Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Had she noticed his reaction to the birthmark? Did she suspect? "I'm not sure what you mean, Your Highness. Please, don't treat me like a child." Her voice carried a note of desperation that reminded him painfully of Lyanna when she was troubled. "Something has been bothering you since that night. I can see it in your eyes every time you look at me. What is it?" The truth burned in his throat like acid. She deserved to know, deserved to understand why she'd always felt different, why the Queen's affection had always seemed forced, why she'd never quite fit the mold expected of her. But the cost, Your Highness, some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Dangerous to whom? Ilara's green eyes, Lyanna's eyes, blazed with determination. To the crown, to my mother, or to you? The question hung between them like a blade. Marcus could see the intelligence in her gaze, the quick mind that had always set her apart from her supposed noble breeding. She was piecing things together, drawing connections that terrified him. Ilara. The name slipped out unbidden, without her title, spoken with the tenderness of a father rather than the formality of a guard. She drew back as if struck. "You've never called me by my name before. Not like that." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Captain, what aren't you telling me?" Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his impossible choice crushing down on him. Tell her the truth and watch her world crumble. Watch the kingdom tear itself apart as nobles question the legitimacy of the crown. Watch Queen Isabella's carefully constructed facade collapse, likely taking the realm's stability with it. Or continue the lie. Let his daughter believe herself the child of the woman who had stolen her, while he remained forever in the shadows, protecting the very deception that had destroyed his life. Some truths, he said finally, opening his eyes to meet her searching gaze, require more courage than I possess. Elara stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her brilliant mind working, cataloguing every telling pause, every careful word. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new maturity that broke his heart. Then I suppose I'll have to find that courage myself. She turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his sword and his impossible secret, knowing that time was running out faster than he'd feared. The candlelight flickered against the stone walls of Gareth's modest quarters as he sat hunched over a wooden chest, its contents scattered across his small table. Letters tied with faded ribbon, a lock of auburn hair, and a tiny silver bracelet, all that remained of his murdered wife and stolen daughter. His hands trembled as he held the bracelet up to the light, remembering how it had caught the morning sun when he'd fastened it around his newborn's tiny wrist. 17 years. 17 years of believing his child was dead, buried alongside her mother in graves that held only stones and his broken heart. A soft knock interrupted his torment. Gareth quickly swept the mementos back into the chest, but not before palming the bracelet. Enter. Princess Lyanna stepped through the doorway, her golden hair catching the candlelight. Even in the dim glow, the resemblance to Mira was undeniable. The same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting her head when deep in thought. "Sir Gareth, She stopped, noticing his haggard appearance. "Are you unwell?" He forced his expression into something resembling normalcy. "I'm fine, Your Highness. You shouldn't be here alone. I needed to speak with you." She closed the door behind her, a breach of protocol that would have scandalized the court. "About what happened in the carriage. You've been different since then, distant. Did I do something wrong?" The innocence in her voice nearly undid him. Here stood his daughter, his blood, his flesh, asking if she had somehow offended him, while he grappled with a truth that could topple kingdoms. "No," he said roughly, "you did nothing wrong." Lyanna moved closer, her eyes scanning the sparse room before settling on his clenched fist. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing that concerns you. Everything about you concerns me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither dared acknowledge. She had always been drawn to him in ways that defied explanation, seeking his counsel over her tutors, his protection over other guards. Now he understood why. Blood called to blood, even when minds remained ignorant. "Your Highness, Lyanna," she corrected, stepping closer still. "When we're alone, please. I'm tired of walls between us." Walls. If only she knew the chasm that truly separated them, not one of rank, but of stolen years and murdered love. He opened his fist slightly, revealing a glimpse of silver. Her sharp intake of breath told him she'd seen it. "What is that?" Gareth looked into her eyes, Mira's eyes, and felt his resolve wavering. What harm could there be in showing her? She wouldn't understand its significance. He held out the bracelet. "It belonged to someone I loved, someone I lost." Lyanna took it with reverence, turning the delicate silver over in her palm. The craftsmanship was exquisite but simple, a vine pattern with tiny emerald leaves. As she examined it, her brow furrowed. "This is beautiful. Was she your wife?" "Yes." The word came out strangled. "What happened to her?" Gareth closed his eyes, the old pain fresh as ever. "She was murdered, by order of someone who wanted what she had." "I'm so sorry." Lyanna's voice was barely a whisper. She looked down at the bracelet again, then froze. "Gareth, this is strange." His eyes snapped open. "What?" "This pattern." She pointed to a particular section of the vine work. "I've seen it before." Ice flooded his veins. "Where?" Lyanna was quiet for a long moment, her finger tracing the silver leaves. "I have dreams sometimes, nightmares really. They've plagued me since childhood. There's always a woman singing and she's wearing something silver, something that catches the light." She looked up at him, confusion clear in her features. I can never see her face clearly, but I remember the bracelet. It's exactly like this one. The room seemed to spin around Gareth. Mira had sung to their daughter every night, old lullabies her own mother had taught her. Could Lyanna somehow remember? She'd been barely 3 months old when, "The woman in your dreams," he managed to ask, "What does she sing?" Without hesitation, Lyanna began to hum a melody that drove a dagger through his heart. It was Mira's favorite lullaby, the one she'd hummed while pregnant, the one she'd whispered to their baby girl in those precious few months they'd had together. "How do you know that song?" His voice cracked with emotion. I don't know. I've always known it." She studied his face, alarmed by his pallor. "Gareth, what's wrong? You look as if you've seen a ghost." He had. He was staring at one, the ghost of his murdered family, risen in the form of the girl he'd sworn to protect. The girl who was his daughter, stolen and raised by the very people who'd destroyed his world. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "have you ever questioned your place in the royal family?" Lyanna's laugh was hollow. "Every day. I've never felt like I truly belonged." "Because you don't," he thought desperately. "You belong with me." The servants' quarters reeked of stale bread and fear. Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall, listening to the rhythmic footsteps of the night patrol fade into distance. 3 floors below the royal chambers, hidden among the maze of corridors where palace staff scurried like mice, he had finally cornered the woman who held the key to his past. Elara huddled in the corner of her cramped chamber, her weathered hands trembling as she clutched a faded shawl. 20 years had carved deep lines into her face, but Marcus recognized the midwife who had delivered his daughter, the daughter he'd believed dead until that terrible moment of revelation. "You remember me," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. "Captain," she breathed, and the title carried the weight of decades. "I wondered when you would come." The admission hit him like a physical blow. She had been waiting, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. Marcus stepped closer, noting how she flinched despite his careful movements. "Tell me what happened that night. Tell me what you did with my child." Elara's eyes darted toward the door, then back to his face. In the flickering candlelight, she looked ancient, hollowed out by guilt. The Queen. She lost her baby, stillborn. The cord was wrapped. She shuddered. "I've delivered hundreds of children, but sometimes, no matter what you do—" "My daughter," Marcus pressed, though his throat felt raw. "Where did you take her?" "Your wife was dying. The fever had her, and she was calling for you, but you were away on the king's business. When she—" Elara paused, pressing her lips together. "When she passed, you still weren't back. The baby was crying, hungry, and I didn't know what to do. A guard's child with no mother and no prospects." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "So you decided for yourself. You decided my daughter would be better served as someone else's child." "The Queen was mad with grief," Elara continued, her voice gaining strength as if confession was freeing something long buried. "She held that dead baby and wouldn't let go. The king was desperate, terrified she'd lose her mind completely. When I brought your daughter to the Queen's chambers, just to see if she might nurse another child, help her through the worst of it. She bonded with her immediately," Marcus finished, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "The Queen's milk came in, and your daughter latched on like she'd been born for it. For the first time in days, the Queen stopped screaming. She looked peaceful. The king saw it too." Elara's voice dropped. "He begged me to keep the secret, said the kingdom needed an heir, needed their queen whole. He offered me gold, position, anything I wanted." "What did you want?" The question came out harder than Marcus intended. "To see that child live," Elara said fiercely. "You think a guard's orphan daughter would have survived? You think she'd have had tutors, fine clothes, the best food? She'd have been lucky to avoid the streets." Marcus turned away, staring at the small window where dawn light was beginning to creep through. Outside, the kingdom was waking up, unaware that their beloved princess was living a lie that had shattered an entire family. "You could have told me. When I returned, you could have explained." "And then what?" You'd have demanded your daughter back, destroyed the Queen's recovery, started a succession crisis. Alara stood slowly, her joints creaking. I watched you, Captain. All these years I watched you guard that child like she was your own flesh and blood anyway. The irony was not lost on him. Marcus thought of every moment he'd stood outside Lydia's door, every threat he'd evaluated and neutralized, every time he'd felt that inexplicable protective instinct that went beyond duty. His heart had known what his mind couldn't accept. The Queen, he said. Does she know? Alara shook her head. I think sometimes she suspects something, deep down, but she's convinced herself otherwise. She loves that girl with a mother's heart. And the King? Took the secret to his grave, made me swear on my soul I'd never tell. Marcus faced her again. Yet, here we are. Because you already know, don't you? You've seen something that proved it. Alara studied his face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people in their most vulnerable moments. The birthmark. He didn't deny it. Couldn't. What will you do now, Captain? She asked. The question that had been tormenting him for days hung between them like a blade. Marcus looked at this woman who had reshaped his entire life with a single decision, who had given his daughter a crown but stolen her from him completely. I don't know, he admitted, and the words felt like surrendering everything he'd ever believed about duty, honor, and truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the castle courtyard as Gareth made his way to the armory, his mind churning with the weight of his decision. 3 days had passed since his conversation with Elena in the garden, and each sunrise brought him closer to the moment when he would have to act on his promise. Today, he would begin gathering the evidence that could topple a throne. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he polished his sword, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The Queen's daily routines, the locations of crucial documents, the timing of guard rotations, all of it catalogued in his mind like a battle plan. He had served this kingdom faithfully for 20 years, and now he was preparing to become its greatest threat. You look troubled, my friend. Gareth looked up to find Sir Marcus standing in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. The older knight had been his mentor when Gareth first joined the Royal Guard, teaching him not just swordplay but the subtle art of court survival. The princess has been asking for you, Marcus continued, stepping into the armory. She seems different lately, more withdrawn. Gareth's grip tightened on his sword. Of course, Elena was struggling. She was living with the same terrible knowledge that had been eating away at him, the same impossible choice between truth and loyalty. Perhaps she's simply growing up, Gareth replied carefully. The responsibilities of her position weigh heavily on young shoulders. Marcus studied him with sharp eyes. And what of your shoulders, Gareth? You've been carrying some burden of your own these past days. I can see it in the way you move, the way you watch the shadows. For a moment, Gareth was tempted to confide in his old friend. Marcus had always been trustworthy, a man of honor who valued truth above convenience, but involving him would only put Marcus in the same agonizing position that Gareth now faced. We all have our burdens, Gareth said finally. Before Marcus could respond, rapid footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. A young page burst into the armory, his face flushed with urgency. Sir Gareth, the Queen requests your immediate presence in her private study. Ice ran through Gareth's veins. Queen Isabel rarely summoned individual guards to her personal chambers unless something was gravely wrong. Had she somehow discovered his investigation? Had Elena's changed behavior raised suspicions? Go, Marcus said quietly, noting Gareth's hesitation. And remember, whatever storm is brewing, it will pass. If only it were that simple, Gareth thought as he followed the page through the castle's winding corridors. With each step, he felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a physical force. The Queen's study was a monument to power and refinement, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes and priceless artifacts from across the realm. Queen Isabel stood with her back to the door, gazing out the tall window at the kingdom spread below her. Even in the morning light she appeared pale and drawn. "Your Majesty," Gareth said, bowing deeply. 20 years, she said without turning around. 20 years you've served this crown with unwavering loyalty. Do you know what I value most about you, Sir Gareth? The question sent warning bells through his mind. I serve at your pleasure, Your Majesty. Your discretion. Now she turned to face him, and Gareth saw something unsettling in her eyes, a mixture of calculation and desperation. There have been rumors lately, whispers about the princess's parentage. Idle court gossip, no doubt, but dangerous nonetheless. Gareth's heart hammered against his ribs, but he kept his expression neutral. Gossip is the currency of those with too much time and too little purpose, Your Majesty. Indeed. The Queen moved closer, her silk gown rustling softly. But even idle whispers can become dangerous weapons in the wrong hands. I trust I can count on your continued loyalty in silencing such distractions. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Queen Isabel suspected something, even if she didn't know the full extent of what Gareth had discovered. This was her way of testing him, of ensuring his compliance through veiled intimidation. You have my sword and my silence, Your Majesty, Gareth replied, hating himself for the lie even as he spoke it. As always. Relief flickered across the Queen's features, but her smile remained cold. I knew I could depend on you. There will, of course, be a substantial reward for your continued understanding, gold, lands, perhaps even a noble title when the time is right. She was trying to buy his silence now, sweetening the threat with promises of wealth and status. 20 years ago, such an offer might have tempted him, but now, knowing what she had stolen from him, the words felt like ash in his ears. Your confidence is reward enough, Your Majesty. As he left the Queen's study, Gareth realized that his path had become clearer, even as it grew more dangerous. Queen Isabel's desperation confirmed what he already knew. The truth was a loaded weapon, and she would do anything to keep it from firing. But some weapons were meant to be used, no matter the cost. The abandoned watchtower stood like a skeletal finger against the storm-darkened sky, its crumbling stones bearing witness to secrets that should have died with the dead. Elara pulled her cloak tighter as she climbed the treacherous stairs, each step echoing her racing heartbeat. Below, Marcus waited in the shadows, his hand never leaving his sword hilt as he watched for any sign they'd been followed. She'd insisted on coming alone to meet the mysterious messenger who claimed to have answers about her true parentage, but Marcus had refused to let her venture into danger unaccompanied. The note had been specific. Midnight, the old watchtower, come alone or learn nothing. They'd compromised. She would go up while he remained hidden below. The wind howled through gaps in the ancient mortar as Elara reached the tower's peak. A hooded figure emerged from the shadows, moving with surprising grace for someone supposedly old enough to remember events from 20 years past. You came, the figure said, and Elara's breath caught. The voice was feminine, cultured, and achingly familiar. Show yourself, Elara demanded, surprised by the steel in her own voice. The figure lowered her hood, revealing silver-streaked auburn hair and eyes the same unusual violet shade Elara saw in her own mirror each morning. The woman's face bore the elegant bone structure of nobility, but also the weathered look of someone who'd known hardship. Hello, daughter. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her mind reeling. That's impossible. You're dead. The midwife who helped steal me, she died years ago. The midwife did die, yes, but I am not she. The woman stepped closer, and in the moonlight, Elara could see tears glistening on her cheeks. I am Lady Catherine Westbrook. I was your wet nurse, but more than that, I was the one who first held you, who first sang you to sleep. I was the one who loved you before I was forced to give you away. Forced? Elara's voice was barely a whisper. Your father, your real father, he was my beloved, but he was already married, already bound by duty to another. When you were born, I knew keeping you would destroy his career, his honor, everything he'd worked for. The Queen was desperate for an heir, having lost 3 babes already. It seemed like providence, a way to give you the life you deserved while sparing your father the scandal that would have ruined him. The tower seemed to spin around Ilara. "Marcus," she breathed. "You're speaking of Marcus." Catherine nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "He never knew. I told him you died in childbirth, that there were complications. It was the cruelest kindness I could offer. He mourned you so deeply I feared he might take his own life. But the Queen's baby? What happened to the real princess?" "She was born sickly, lived only hours. I was attending both births that night, yours in my modest chambers, hers in the royal apartments. When the princess died and I saw the Queen's desperation, when I thought of the life you could have—" Catherine's voice broke. "I convinced myself I was doing what was best for everyone. You would be a princess, Marcus would be spared disgrace, and the kingdom would have its heir." Ilara felt as though she were drowning in revelations. "Why tell me this now? Why come forward after all these years?" "Because I've watched from afar as you've grown into a remarkable woman. Because I've seen the way your father looks at you now, the confusion and pain in his eyes, and because I've learned that Queen Isabella suspects the truth. She's been investigating, asking questions. If she discovers what really happened, she'll have me killed." The words came out flat, matter of fact. Ilara had always known the Queen's affection was conditional, but she'd never imagined it could turn lethal. Or worse, she'll use the knowledge to destroy Marcus. She could claim he was part of the deception, that he helped orchestrate the switch for his own gain. The penalty for treason against the crown is death, but not a quick one. The implications crashed over Ilara like a tide. Not only was her own life in danger, but Marcus, her father, the man who'd unknowingly raised his own daughter as a loyal guardian, could pay the ultimate price for a deception he'd never been part of. "What do you want from me?" Ilara asked. "I have a ship waiting in the harbor. We could disappear tonight, start fresh in the Eastern Kingdoms where no one knows our faces. You could live as yourself, not as someone else's stolen identity, and leave Marcus to face the Queen's wrath alone." Catherine's face crumpled. "I know it's asking the impossible, but staying means certain death for all of us. The Queen grows more suspicious each day. It's only a matter of time before she pieces together the truth." Below them, an owl hooted mournfully, and Ilara realized that her childhood, her identity, her very existence as Princess Ilara was about to end forever. The only question was whether she'd live to see what came next. The dungeons beneath Blackmore Castle had not seen such distinguished prisoners in decades. Captain Aldrich sat in his cell, wrists chafed from iron shackles, watching condensation drip steadily from the moss-covered stones. Each drop marked another moment that Lyanna remained in danger, another second that his secret festered like poison in the kingdom's heart. Footsteps echoed through the corridor, measured, deliberate. Not the heavy boots of guards, but the whisper-soft approach of someone who moved like shadow. Aldrich rose as a hooded figure emerged from the gloom, and his breath caught as Princess Lyanna lowered her hood. "You shouldn't be here," he said, gripping the bars. "If they find you—" "Let me worry about that." Her green eyes, so like his own, searched his face with desperate intensity. "I bribed the guards with my mother's jewelry. We have minutes. Nothing more. Your Highness, please. Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't call me that. Not after what I've learned." She pulled something from beneath her cloak, a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "I found this in my mother's chambers, the real Queen's chambers in the abandoned East Wing." Aldrich's heart hammered against his ribs as she opened the journal, revealing pressed flowers and careful script in faded ink. "Listen to this," Lyanna whispered, her voice trembling. "My dearest Marcus, our daughter grows more beautiful each day. The butterfly birthmark you love to trace with your finger has darkened, a perfect match to yours. I pray you return from the Northern Campaign before she takes her first steps." The words hit Aldrich like physical blows. Marcus, Captain Marcus Thorne, his predecessor, who had died in the border wars when Aldrich was barely more than a boy himself. There's more, Lyanna continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She has your stubborn spirit already. When she cries, only humming the old Valerian lullabies will soothe her. I fear what will become of us if something happens to you, my love. A queen's bastard has few protections in this world. Lyanna, Aldrich began, but she wasn't finished. The entries stop abruptly. The last one, her voice broke entirely. The last one says the queen discovered everything, that she was planning to send both mother and child away in the night to protect the kingdom's stability. She looked up at him with eyes full of anguish. My real mother died in that carriage accident, didn't she? The one where you found me? Aldrich closed his eyes, the weight of 17 years pressing down upon him. I swore an oath to protect the royal family, but I never imagined that you'd be protecting the wrong child. Lyanna stepped closer to the bars, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Don't you see? We've both been living lies. I'm not the legitimate princess, and you've spent your life serving the woman who stole someone else's daughter and passed her off as her own. The kingdom is built on deception. Her passionate outburst echoed through the dungeon before she caught herself, glancing nervously toward the guard station. How many other secrets are hidden in these walls? How many other lives destroyed to maintain the illusion of royal purity? Aldrich studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes that spoke of justice and truth above all else. She was Marcus Thorne's daughter, without question, but she was also something more, something that transcended bloodlines and birthmarks. What are you proposing? He asked quietly. Help me expose the truth, not just about my parentage, but about everything. The Queen's paranoia, her willingness to steal children and rewrite history. Lyanna gripped the bars, her knuckles white. People deserve to know what kind of ruler they've been serving. And throw the kingdom into chaos? Start a civil war over succession? Aldrich shook his head. Lyanna, think of what you're saying. Thousands could die. And how many have already suffered in silence? She shot back. How many other families destroyed by royal decree? How many other truths buried in abandoned wings and forgotten dungeons? Before Aldrich could respond, heavy footsteps thundered through the corridor. Lyanna quickly stuffed the journal back beneath her cloak as Commander Garrett appeared, flanked by 6 guards in full armor. Your Highness, Garrett said, his tone carefully neutral. Her Majesty requests your immediate presence in the throne room. Lyanna straightened, every inch the royal princess despite the tears still glistening on her cheeks. Of course, I was merely ensuring the prisoner was properly secured. As she turned to leave, her eyes met Aldrich's one last time. In that gaze, he saw a promise and a threat intertwined. She would seek the truth with or without his help. The only question was whether he would stand beside her when the foundations of the kingdom finally crumbled. The guards escorted her away, leaving Aldrich alone with the dripping stones and the terrible weight of choices yet to come. The Queen's private chambers felt like a tomb as Marcus stood before her, the weight of truth heavy between them. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the gravity of what was about to unfold. Helena sat at her vanity, her reflection pale and haunted in the mirror. I wondered when this moment would come, she said without turning around, her voice barely above a whisper. 18 years of living with this secret, and I could see it in your eyes the moment you realized. Marcus felt his throat constrict. You knew I would figure it out. Helena's laugh was bitter, broken, a mother's intuition, perhaps. Or maybe it was the way you looked at her after the accident, like you were seeing a ghost. She finally turned to face him, and Marcus was struck by how fragile she appeared without her royal composure. She has your eyes, you know. I've spent years avoiding looking directly at her because of it. The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. Why? The single word contained 18 years of anguish, of watching his daughter from afar, of believing her dead. Helena rose slowly, moving to the window where she could gaze out at the kingdom spread below. Because I was dying, Marcus. The physicians gave me months to live after my 3rd miscarriage. The king needed an heir, the kingdom needed stability, and I needed to matter. So you stole my child. I saved her, Helena snapped, whirling around with a flash of her old fire. Do you think she would have lived a better life as the daughter of a guard and a seamstress? Your wife was hemorrhaging, Marcus. She was going to die regardless. The midwife came to me with the opportunity to give that child a future beyond anything you could have provided. Marcus stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. That wasn't your choice to make, wasn't it? Helena's voice rose, then she caught herself, glancing toward the door. When she spoke again, it was with careful control. I was the queen. The kingdom was fracturing. Neighboring realms were eyeing our borders, waiting for any sign of weakness. A childless monarchy would have invited invasion, civil war. How many would have died for your right to raise one little girl in poverty? The logic was cold, calculated, and it made Marcus's stomach turn. You let me believe she was dead. You let me mourn her. Because it was kinder than the truth. Helena's composure cracked again, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Do you think this has been easy for me? Loving a child I could never truly claim as my own? Every day, I've seen pieces of you in her. Your stubbornness, your sense of justice, your inability to back down from what's right, even when it would be easier. Marcus thought of Lydia's fierce independence, her compassion for the common people, the way she challenged authority when she believed it was wrong. Traits that had both impressed and terrified the court, making perfect sense now. She doesn't know, Helena continued, and she must never know. The kingdom has accepted her as the legitimate heir. There are already marriage negotiations with Prince Edmund of Ravencrest. Her future is secure, built on a lie. Built on necessity. Helena moved closer, her voice taking on an urgent quality. What would you have me do, Marcus? Announce to the world that our princess is the daughter of a guard? Watch as every political alliance crumbles? See her lose everything she's ever known? Marcus turned away, his mind racing. He thought of Lydia's joy when she spoke of her upcoming coronation, her dreams of ruling justly, her love for the people she believed were her subjects by divine right. The revelation would shatter her completely. There's something else, Helena said quietly. Something you need to know before you make any decisions about what to do with this knowledge. Marcus faced her again, dreading what new revelation awaited. The attempts on her life, they're not random. There are those who suspect the truth, who have been investigating inconsistencies in the royal birth records. Lord Aldrich has been asking questions, making inquiries about the midwife who delivered the princess. She died under suspicious circumstances 2 years ago. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They're trying to kill her because they know, or suspect enough to consider her a threat to the true bloodline. Helena's voice was steady now, resolved. As long as she lives and rules, the secret remains dangerous. But if she were to die before producing an heir, the throne would pass to your cousin's line, Marcus finished, Lord Aldrich's family. Helena nodded grimly. Now you understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just about one stolen child anymore, Marcus. This is about survival, hers, mine, and the kingdom's. The question is, what are you prepared to do with the truth? The storm that had been brewing all evening finally broke as Marcus stood before the Queen's private chambers, his hand trembling on the ornate door handle. Thunder rolled across the castle like the footsteps of angry gods, and lightning illuminated the corridors in stark, violent flashes. How fitting, he thought, that the heavens themselves seemed to mirror the tempest about to be unleashed within these walls. He had made his choice 3 days ago, after watching Lydia, his daughter, his blood, struggle with the weight of a crown that was never meant to be hers. The assassination attempts were escalating. Lord Blackwood's faction grew bolder by the hour, sensing weakness in a throne built on lies. And Lydia, sweet Lydia, was drowning in a role she'd never chosen, surrounded by enemies she couldn't identify, because she didn't even know who she truly was. The door opened before he could knock. Queen Isabel stood in the threshold, her once golden hair now streaked with premature silver, her eyes holding the hollow look of someone who had been expecting this moment for 16 years. "You've come to destroy me," she said simply, stepping aside to let him enter. I wondered when this day would arrive. Marcus stepped into the chamber, his sword remaining sheathed despite every instinct screaming at him to draw it. The room was dimly lit by candles, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with guilt and secrets. "Your Majesty." "Don't!" Isabel's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare use that title with me now, not when you know what I am, what I've done." She moved to the window, pressing her palms against the cold glass as rain lashed against it. "You've seen the birthmark, haven't you? On Lydia's shoulder?" The confirmation hit him like a physical blow, even though he'd been certain. "Yes. The same mark your wife bore. The same mark you described to me in your delirium after she died, when grief had nearly driven you mad." Isabel's reflection in the window looked like a spectre of the woman she once was. "You spoke of it often in those dark days, Marcus. How you used to trace it with your finger when she slept. How it looked like a small crown, which you said was fitting for a woman who ruled your heart." Marcus's throat constricted. The memories of Elena, of their brief happiness before the fever took her, threatened to overwhelm him. "You stole my child while I was grieving my wife. You let me believe she died in birth while you passed her off as your own." "My son was stillborn," Isabel whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Blue and cold and perfect in every way except that he would never draw breath. The kingdom needed an heir. I needed an heir, or Blackwood would have had me declared unfit and seized the throne himself. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your daughter was born the same night, healthy, beautiful, crying with such strength. And you were insensible with grief, believing both Elena and the child were lost. So you took her." The words came out as a growl. "I saved her." Isabel's composure shattered. "You would have raised her in poverty, Marcus, if grief hadn't killed you first. You were barely functional for months after Elena died. I gave her a crown, a future, everything a father could want for his daughter, except her father." The Queen flinched as if he'd struck her. "Yes, except that." Marcus began to pace, his mind reeling with the confirmation of what he'd already known but hoped somehow wasn't true. Does she know? Of course not. How could she? The only people who knew the truth were myself, the midwife, and the physician. Both are long dead. Isabel studied his face with the desperation of a drowning woman. "But you're going to tell her, aren't you? You're going to destroy everything to claim what you believe is yours." Marcus stopped pacing and met her gaze. The woman, who had ruled his kingdom for over 2 decades, suddenly looked fragile as spun glass. "What I believe is mine. She's mine, Isabel. She's my flesh and blood, raised by the woman who stole her from my arms before I even knew she existed." "And what do you think revealing that truth will accomplish?" Isabel demanded. "Blackwood's supporters will use it to tear apart her legitimacy. The kingdom will fall into civil war. Lydia will lose everything, her crown, her identity, possibly her life. Is your need for fatherhood worth that price?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, and somewhere in the castle, Lydia slept peacefully, unaware that her entire world balanced on the edge of her biological father's next words. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing Elena's face, remembering the weight of their newborn daughter in his arms for those brief, precious moments before fever took his consciousness. When he opened them again, his decision was written in the steel of his gaze. The throne room had never felt so cavernous, its vaulted ceiling seeming to press down upon Marcus as he knelt before Queen Isabel. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows cast fractured colors across the marble floor, painting everything in shades of amber and crimson that reminded him uncomfortably of blood and gold, the twin currencies of royal power. "You summoned me, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning in his chest. 3 days had passed since his confrontation with Elena, 3 days of sleepless nights and careful observation, 3 days of watching his daughter, he could no longer deny what she was to him, move through the palace like a ghost, her usual vibrant spirit dim to barely flickering embers. The Queen descended from her throne with measured steps, her silk gown whispering against the stone. At 52, Isabel remained a formidable presence, her dark hair streaked with premature silver that only served to enhance her austere beauty. But Marcus noticed what others might miss, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted toward the shadows in the corners of the room. "Lord Commander Thorne," she began, then paused, studying his face with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "You've served our house faithfully for how long now?" 18 years, Your Majesty, since Princess Elena was born." The words came out before he could stop them, laden with meaning that hung in the air between them like a blade. Something flickered in the Queen's eyes, fear, perhaps, or recognition. "Yes," she said slowly, "such loyalty deserves acknowledgement." She moved to the tall windows overlooking the courtyard, where Elena could be seen in the gardens below, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "Tell me, Marcus, and I hope you don't mind if I speak informally, given our long association, what do you know of the night my daughter was born?" The question hit him like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. "Only what the kingdom knows, Your Majesty. That Princess Elena was born during the great storm, and that you nearly died bringing her into the world." "Nearly died," Isabel repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it." She turned from the window, and Marcus was startled to see tears glistening in her eyes. "What if I told you that I did die that night? That the woman you've served all these years died in that birthing chamber, screaming for a child who would never draw breath?" The confession hung between them like a chasm. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble, each word from the Queen's lips another stone falling into the abyss. "Your Majesty, I don't understand." "Don't you?" Isabel's laugh was bitter, broken. "You, of all people, should understand perfectly. Your wife, Sarah, died that same night, didn't she? Died giving birth to a daughter with the most unusual birthmark, a crescent moon upon her shoulder blade." Marcus's hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt, though whether to defend himself or surrender to justice he couldn't say. "How do you know about the birthmark?" "Because I've seen it, Marcus. I've dressed my daughter's hair every morning for 18 years, and every morning I've been reminded of my sin." The Queen's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "When my child died and the midwife told me the kingdom would fall without an heir, when she whispered that there was another babe born that very night to a guard's wife who wouldn't survive the fever, I thought it was God's mercy, a gift to preserve the realm. You stole her." The words came out as a growl, 18 years of suppressed rage finally breaking free. "You stole my daughter and let me believe she was dead." "I saved her!" Isabel's voice cracked like a whip. "Would you have preferred she grew up in poverty? That she lived and died as a commoner, never knowing her true potential? I gave her everything, education, luxury, power, love." "You gave her my love," Marcus snarled, stepping closer. "You made me love her as my princess when she should have been my daughter all along." The Queen backed away, pressing herself against the cold stone of the window. "And what would you have me do now? Destroy the kingdom? Plunge our people into civil war? Elena is all that stands between us and chaos. Her marriage to Prince Aldrich will secure our borders, ensure peace for generations." "She's miserable," Marcus said quietly. "Your precious political marriage is killing her spirit day by day." "Sometimes," Isabel whispered, "duty demands sacrifice." Marcus stared at this woman who had shaped his life with her lies, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down upon him. In the garden below, Elena sat alone on a marble bench, and even from this distance he could see the slump of her shoulders, the loneliness that radiated from her like heat from dying embers. The kingdom's fate hung in the balance, suspended on the edge of truth and lies, between love and duty, between the man he'd been and the father he'd never known he could become. The dawn sky bled crimson through the tall windows of the throne room as Lyra stood before the assembled court, her hands trembling despite her efforts to appear composed. The weight of the crown felt foreign on her brow, but the truth burning in her chest felt heavier still. Behind her, Gareth remained at attention, his face a mask of professional stoicism that revealed nothing of the storm raging beneath. Queen Isabel sat rigid on her throne, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. The stolen years stretched between them like a chasm that could never be bridged, filled with lies that had shaped a kingdom. "My lords and ladies," Lyra began, her voice carrying across the hushed chamber, "I stand before you today not as the princess you believed me to be, but as someone who has learned the true meaning of family, loyalty, and sacrifice." She paused, her eyes finding Gareth's for a brief moment before continuing. "Recent events have brought to light irregularities in my heritage." A murmur rippled through the assembled nobles. Lord Chancellor Aldrich stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "Your Highness, perhaps such matters should be discussed in private council." "No." Lyra's voice cut through his protest with surprising authority. "The people of this realm deserve honesty from their rulers. They have been denied it for too long." Queen Isabel rose slowly, her composure finally cracking. "Lyra, child, you don't understand the consequences." "I understand that you stole me from my father." The words hung in the air like a sword suspended over the throne itself. "I understand that Captain Gareth lost his wife and daughter in what he believed was a tragic accident, while you raised his child as your own to secure your claim to power." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several nobles took involuntary steps backward, as if the revelation might somehow taint them. Gareth closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 19 years of grief and unknowing settle on his shoulders. "You speak treason," the Queen whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "I speak truth." Lyra turned to face the woman who had raised her, and despite everything, tears glistened in her eyes. "You loved me, I know that, but love built on such a foundation. How could it ever be enough?" Lord Aldrich cleared his throat, his political instincts overriding his shock. "If what you suggest is true, Your Highness, then the implications for the succession, for the stability of the realm, would be catastrophic." Gareth finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of decades of service. He stepped forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt, not in threat, but in the unconscious gesture of a man preparing for battle. "Which is why Princess Lyra will say no more of this matter." Lyra spun to face him, confusion and betrayal warring in her expression. "Father, you can't mean—" "I mean that some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not the weakness of a man choosing comfortable lies, but the terrible strength of one making an impossible sacrifice. "The princess suffered a head injury in the carriage accident. She has been confused, imagining things." "Gareth!" Queen Isabel breathed, her voice barely audible. "Her Highness will recover fully," he continued, his tone growing stronger with each word. "The royal physicians have assured us that such temporary delusions are common with such injuries. Is that not so, Your Highness?" The silence stretched like a bowstring drawn to its breaking point. Lyra stared at the man she had just learned was her father, seeing in his weathered features not betrayal, but a love so profound it would destroy itself to keep her safe, to keep the kingdom safe. She began, then stopped. In that moment, she understood the true burden of leadership, not the crown on one's head, but the weight of choices that had no right answers. The revelation of her parentage would not just topple a queen, it would shatter the delicate peace their realm had enjoyed, would call into question every treaty, every alliance, every oath sworn to the crown. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "I have been unwell, confused. The captain speaks truly." Lord Aldrich nodded slowly, relief evident in his posture. "Then we shall speak no more of this unfortunate episode. The princess requires rest and privacy to recover fully." As the court began to disperse, their whispers already reshaping the morning's events into something safer, more palatable, Lyra felt a hand touch her shoulder gently. She turned to find Queen Isabel beside her, tears streaming down the older woman's face. "I'm sorry," the Queen whispered, "for everything. For the choice I made, for the years he lost, for the impossible position I've put you in." Lyra nodded, unable to speak. Across the emptying throne room, Gareth watched them, his daughter and the woman who had raised her, and felt something break apart inside his chest. The truth would remain buried as it must, but the knowing of it, the terrible, beautiful knowing, would be his to carry until his last breath. The dawn broke over the kingdom with an unusual stillness, as if the very air held its breath for what was to come. Marcus stood at the palace gates, his uniform pristine despite the sleepless night behind him. In his weathered hands he held a sealed letter, his resignation from the Royal Guard, effective immediately. Princess Elena approached from the courtyard, her steps hesitant but determined. The morning light caught the golden strands in her hair, and Marcus felt that familiar pang of recognition that had haunted him for weeks. She was no longer the sheltered royal he had sworn to protect. She was his daughter, and the weight of that truth had fundamentally changed everything between them. "You're really leaving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's for the best, Your Highness." The formal address felt like glass in his throat, but some boundaries could never be crossed, no matter what blood they shared. Elena's eyes flashed with frustration. "Don't call me that. Not now. Not after everything we've discovered." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're my father." The words hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Marcus glanced around the courtyard, ensuring they remained alone. "You are the crown princess of this realm. That is your truth, and it must remain so. But it's built on a lie." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "My entire life, everything I believed about myself, has made you into the leader this kingdom needs." Marcus's voice carried the weight of his years, his sacrifice. "The people love you. They trust you. Would you shatter that for the selfish comfort of knowing your true parentage?" Elena's composure cracked. "Selfish? Is it selfish to want to know the man who gave me life? To understand why I never felt like I belonged in that castle?" Behind them, footsteps echoed across the stone courtyard. Queen Isabella emerged from the palace, her face a mask of regal composure, but Marcus could see the fear lurking beneath. She had known this moment would come since the night he'd confronted her with the truth about the birthmark. "Captain Marcus," the Queen said, her voice steady, "I trust you've made your decision." He bowed formally. "Your Majesty, my resignation is hereby submitted." Isabella's gaze shifted to Elena, and for a moment the carefully constructed walls between them wavered. "And you, my dear, have you decided where your loyalties lie?" Elena looked between the two people who had shaped her life, the woman who had raised her as her own, and the man who had unknowingly watched his daughter grow from the shadows. The kingdom's future balanced on her next words. "My loyalty," Elena said slowly, "is to the people of this realm, as it has always been." She met her adoptive mother's eyes. "As yours should be." Isabella's relief was palpable, but Marcus saw deeper, saw the genuine love the Queen held for the girl she had claimed as her own. Whatever sins had been committed in Elena's infancy, they had grown from desperate love, not malice. "The succession remains secure," Isabella murmured. "For now," Elena replied, and the subtle warning in her tone was not lost on either adult. "But there will be changes, Mother. The kingdom deserves better than the shadows and secrets that have governed it." Marcus felt a surge of fierce pride. His daughter, though the world would never know her as such, had inherited not just his sense of duty, but his moral compass. She would be a queen worth following. "Then I shall take my leave," Marcus said, shouldering his travel pack. He had already arranged for a small cottage in the northern provinces, far from the capital's intrigues. Elena stepped forward impulsively. Will I ever see you again?" The question broke something inside him, but Marcus's expression remained stoic. "Perhaps our paths will cross, Your Highness. The kingdom is smaller than it seems." She nodded, understanding the careful distance they must maintain. Then, in a gesture that appeared to any observer as simple gratitude to a departing guard, she pressed a small object into his palm. A locket containing a miniature portrait, not of the royal family, but a small painting she had commissioned of a simple guard who had always watched over her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything you sacrificed." Marcus closed his fingers around the locket, his only acknowledgement a slight nod. He turned and walked toward the gates, each step carrying him away from the greatest truth of his life. As he reached the threshold, Elena called out once more, "Captain Marcus!" He paused but did not turn. "The kingdom will remember your service." But as Marcus disappeared into the bustling streets beyond the palace walls, he carried with him something more precious than recognition or reward. He carried the knowledge that his daughter would rule with wisdom, compassion, and strength. The secret would die with him, but the kingdom would live on in capable hands.